The November wind carried the scent of Lake Michigan through the open window of the Moretti mansion on South Ashland Avenue, mixing with the thick smoke of Cuban cigars and the sweet perfume that Lucia Moretti had worn since her wedding day 4 years ago. She stood before the gilt-edged mirror in her dressing room, fastening a string of pearls around her neck, pearls that Vincent had given her the night after her brother's funeral. She hadn't known then what she knew now. Chicago in 1931 was a city eating itself alive. The stock market crash had gutted the dreams of honest men, and the Volstead Act had made criminals of everyone else. But for Vincent Moretti, the Depression was just another opportunity. While breadlines stretched around city blocks and shanty towns sprouted in vacant lots, Vincent's speakeasies flourished, his bootlegging empire swelled, and his pockets grew heavier with blood money. Lucia adjusted the collar of her emerald silk dress and studied her reflection. At 21, she looked older, not in her face, which still held the soft beauty that had caught Vincent's eye at her father's restaurant in Little Italy, but in her eyes. They had the hollow quality of someone who had seen too much and said too little. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Moretti," said Rosa, her lady's maid, a plump woman in her 50s who had been with the household since before the marriage. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she arranged Lucia's dark hair into an elegant chignon. Everyone's hands trembled in the Moretti house these days. "Thank you, Rosa." Lucia's voice was soft, carefully modulated. She had learned early in her marriage that loud women didn't last long in Vincent's world. Neither did curious ones. Downstairs she could hear the rumble of male voices. Vincent was entertaining again. Carlo Benedetti, his right-hand man. Tommy the Fixer O'Brien, his Irish enforcer, and probably a half-dozen others whose names she tried not to learn. The less she knew, Vincent always said, the safer she'd be, as if ignorance had ever protected anyone. The door to her dressing room swung open without a knock. Vincent filled the doorway, all 6 feet of him wrapped in a 3-piece suit that cost more than most families earned in a year. His dark hair was slicked back with pomade, his jaw freshly shaved, and his brown eyes, the eyes that had once made her blush, now made her stomach tighten. "The boys are here," he said, his voice carrying that edge it always had lately, like a blade not quite sheathed. "I need you downstairs. Benedetti's bringing his wife, and she'll want someone to talk to while we discuss business." "Of course." Lucia turned from the mirror, smoothing her dress. "I'll be right down." Vincent didn't move from the doorway. He studied her with the same calculating expression he used when counting money, or deciding which rival to eliminate. "You've been quiet lately." "I haven't felt well." "You haven't felt well for months." He stepped closer and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "The doctor says there's nothing wrong with you. Perhaps I need a different doctor." His hand shot out and gripped her chin, not hard enough to bruise but firm enough to make his point. "Don't get smart with me, Lucia. I've got enough problems without you adding to them." He released her and straightened his tie. "Downstairs. 5 minutes." When he left, Rosa let out a breath she'd been holding. "Mrs. Moretti." "It's fine, Rosa." Lucia's voice was steady, practiced. "He's under stress. The raids have been bad this month." But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Vincent had always been dangerous. That came with the territory of running one of Chicago's most ruthless crime families. But lately, something had shifted. The paranoia that had always simmered beneath his charm had begun to boil over. He saw betrayal in every shadow, treachery in every whispered conversation. Last week he'd beaten one of his own men unconscious for a perceived slight. The week before he'd fired 3 bullets into the wall beside a speakeasy manager who'd come up short on payments. Lucia descended the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the mahogany banister, her heels clicking against marble floors that had been imported from Italy. The house was a monument to Vincent's success. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, paintings by artists she'd never heard of. It was also a prison with velvet bars. The sitting room was thick with smoke and testosterone. Carlo Benedetti sat in Vincent's favorite chair, a mountain of a man with hands like ham hocks and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. His wife, Elena, perched on the arm of the chair like a nervous bird, her fingers playing with the fringe of her shawl. Tommy O'Brien leaned against the fireplace mantel, his red hair catching the light, his freckled face split by a grin that never quite reached his cold blue eyes. "Ah, the lady of the house." Carlo rose with surprising grace for such a large man. "Mrs. Moretti, you're looking lovely as always." "You're too kind, Mr. Benedetti." Lucia extended her hand, which he kissed with exaggerated courtesy. She turned to Elena. "Mrs. Benedetti, how wonderful to see you again. Would you like to join me in the conservatory? I've just had orchids delivered from a grower downtown." Elena's relief was palpable. "I'd love that." As they left the room, Lucia caught fragments of conversation. Shipment from Canada delayed. Capone's boys sniffing around the north side. Need to send a message. She forced herself not to listen too closely. The less she heard, the less she'd have to forget. The conservatory was Lucia's favorite room in the house. A glass-enclosed space filled with plants and flowers that reminded her of simpler times. Before Vincent, before the violence, before she'd learned what her husband truly was. She poured tea from a silver service while Elena made polite small talk about the weather and the new fashions from Paris. "How do you stand it?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper. Lucia's hand paused over the sugar bowl. "Stand what?" "The waiting, the not knowing." Elena's dark eyes were haunted. "Every time Carlo leaves the house, I wonder if he'll come back. And if he does come back." She trailed off, but Lucia understood. The question wasn't whether they'd return, but what they'd bring back with them. The stench of violence, the shadow of death, the casual cruelty that came from wielding power over life and death. "You learn to live with it," Lucia said quietly. "Or you learn to live around it." "Is there a difference?" Before Lucia could answer, the sound of raised voices erupted from the sitting room. Not unusual. Vincent's business meetings often grew heated, but something in the tone made her stiffen. She set down her teacup and moved toward the door. "Mrs. Moretti, perhaps we should—" Elena began, but Lucia was already in the hallway. The sitting room door stood ajar. Through it, she could see Vincent pacing like a caged animal, while Carlo and Tommy watched with the wary attention of men who'd seen this mood before. "I'm telling you, someone's talking to the feds." Vincent's voice was ragged with fury. 3 of our operations shut down in 2 weeks. 3. That doesn't happen by accident. "Boss, maybe it's just bad luck," Tommy offered. "The feds have been cracking down all over the city." "Bad luck?" Vincent spun on him. "I don't believe in bad luck, Tommy. I believe in rats. And when I find out who's been running his mouth," he let the threat hang in the air. Carlo cleared his throat. "What about the Calabrese job? Your brother-in-law knew about that shipment route." Lucia's blood turned to ice. "Marco?" Vincent shook his head. "Marco was loyal. He wouldn't—" "Was he?" Carlo's voice was carefully neutral. "He was asking a lot of questions before he died. Questions about your operation, your connections." "He was family," Vincent said. But there was doubt in his voice now, a crack in his certainty. "Family bleeds you the deepest," Carlo said. "You know that better than anyone." Lucia's hand found the doorframe, gripping it to keep herself steady. Marco, her brother, the gentle, laughing boy who'd taught her to ride a bicycle, who'd walked her to school every day, who'd stood beside her father at her wedding even though he'd never trusted Vincent. Marco, who'd been found face down in the Chicago River 3 months ago with a bullet in the back of his head. Vincent had held her while she cried. He'd arranged the funeral, paid for the flowers, made sure Marco was buried with full honors. He'd sworn on his mother's grave that he'd find whoever killed her brother and make them pay. And all along, it had been him. The room spun. Lucia backed away from the door, her breath coming in short gasps. She made it to the powder room before the nausea hit. She gripped the edge of the marble sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The pale face, the wide eyes, the string of pearls that suddenly felt like a noose. "Mrs. Moretti?" Rosa's voice came from outside the door. "Are you all right?" Lucia splashed cold water on her face, careful not to disturb her makeup. When she opened the door, she was smiling. "I'm fine, Rosa. Just a dizzy spell." But she wasn't fine. As she returned to the conservatory and made polite conversation with Elena Benedetti, as she laughed at the appropriate moments and sipped her tea with steady hands, something inside her was crystallizing into something hard and cold and unbreakable. Vincent had killed her brother, had probably ordered it himself, or nodded when Carlo or Tommy suggested it, had held her while she grieved for a death he'd orchestrated, had played the loving husband while her family buried the boy he'd murdered. That night, as Lucia lay beside her husband in their massive 4-poster bed listening to his snores and the distant sound of jazz from the speakeasy down the street, she made a decision. She would not confront him. She would not run. She would not even let him see that she knew. Instead, she would wait. She would watch. She would learn everything about his operation, his connections, his secrets, and his fears. And when the time was right, when she had all the pieces in place, she would take everything from him, just as he had taken everything from her. The pearls still hung around her neck. She didn't take them off. Outside, the November wind howled through the Chicago streets, carrying with it the promise of a bitter winter. Inside the Moretti mansion, something far colder had taken root. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing Chicago in white that turned gray and filthy within hours. Lucia watched from her bedroom window as the flakes drifted past the street lamps, thinking about how quickly beautiful things became tarnished in this city. She'd been 17 when she married Vincent, a girl who believed in love and honor and the sanctity of family. 4 years later, she understood that love was a lie men told to control you. Honor was a word gangsters used to justify murder, and family was just another commodity to be traded or eliminated as needed. The revelation about Marco's death had changed something fundamental in her. Where there had been fear and resignation, there was now cold calculation. Where there had been submission, there was now strategy. She moved through the house like a ghost, observing everything, forgetting nothing. Vincent's paranoia had worsened. He'd fired 2 of his drivers, convinced they were informants. He'd moved his primary operations to new locations 3 times in as many weeks. He kept a loaded pistol in every room and slept with one under his pillow, but his paranoia made him careless in other ways. He talked too much, drank too much, and underestimated everyone around him, especially his wife. Lucia began her education in the kitchen of all places. "Mrs. Moretti, you shouldn't be down here," said Marie, the head cook, a sturdy German woman who'd been feeding Vincent's men for years. "Mr. Moretti wouldn't like it. Mr. Moretti won't know." Lucia smiled and settled onto a stool at the butcher block counter. "I'm bored, Marie. Indulge me. Tell me about the old days before Vincent built his empire." Marie was lonely, and Lucia was patient. Over cups of strong coffee and the preparation of elaborate meals for Vincent's endless stream of visitors, Marie talked. She talked about the early years, when Vincent was just a hungry kid from the old neighborhood, working his muscle for bigger operators. She talked about the first speakeasy he'd taken over, how he'd convinced the owner to sell by making his wife disappear for 3 days. She talked about the war with the Jenna brothers, the alliance with Johnny Torrio, the eventual split with Al Capone's organization. "He was ruthless even then," Marie said, chopping onions with practiced efficiency, "but he was smart about it. Knew who to pay off, who to threaten, who to kill. That's why he's still breathing when so many others aren't." "What about the Calabrese family?" Lucia asked casually, as if the name didn't make her stomach clench. "I heard they used to do business together." Marie's knife paused. "That's old history, Mrs. Moretti. Best left buried. I'm curious, that's all. My maiden name was Calabrese. I know who you were." Marie resumed chopping, her movements sharper. "Your father ran a good restaurant. Honest man, or as honest as anyone gets in this neighborhood. Vincent used to eat there before you were old enough to wait tables. He courted me for 6 months. He courted your father's connections for a year before that." Marie dumped the onions into a sizzling pan. "Don Antonio Calabrese knew everyone in Little Italy. The politicians, the police captains, the ward bosses. Marrying you gave Vincent legitimacy, made him family instead of just another hood." Lucia absorbed this information with the same careful attention she'd once given to her lessons at Sacred Heart Academy. "And my brother?" Marie's silence was answer enough. Over the following weeks, Lucia expanded her territory. She befriended Rosa more deeply, learning which of Vincent's men were loyal and which were merely afraid. She began appearing in Vincent's study after he left for his nightly rounds, carefully examining his ledgers, his correspondence, his maps of the city with locations marked in red. She memorized names, addresses, routes, and schedules. She discovered that Vincent's empire was larger than she'd imagined. 12 speakeasies, 4 breweries, a network of trucks running Canadian whiskey across the border, 3 gambling dens, and a thriving prostitution operation that made her skin crawl. She also discovered that the empire was fracturing. The Depression had made everyone desperate, and desperate men took desperate risks. Vincent's associates were skimming, his rivals were encroaching, and the federal agents were getting closer every day. But the most interesting discovery was the property in Cicero, a 10-acre vineyard that Vincent had purchased 2 years ago through a shell company. According to his records, it was an investment, a place to grow grapes for when Prohibition inevitably ended. Lucia had never been there, had barely heard him mention it. As far as she could tell, no one else knew about it either. She filed this information away and continued her observations. In January, Vincent's violence escalated. He beat a speakeasy manager so badly the man spent a week in the hospital. He ordered Tommy O'Brien to kill a rival bootlegger's entire crew. 6 men dead in a warehouse on the south side. The police investigation lasted 48 hours before it was quietly dropped. Another murder swept under Chicago's blood-soaked rug. "You need to be careful," Carlo Benedetti told Vincent one evening, his voice carrying from the study to the hallway where Lucia stood motionless. "All this heat, all these bodies, it's drawing attention. Let them look," Vincent snarled. "I own half the cops in this city and the other half are too scared to touch me. It's not the cops I'm worried about, it's the feds. They got Capone on tax evasion. They can get you too. Capone was sloppy. I'm not. You're acting like it. This paranoia, this violence, it's making people nervous. The other families are starting to wonder if you're losing your grip." The sound of glass breaking made Lucia flinch. "You questioning me, Carlo? I'm trying to keep you alive, you stubborn bastard." Carlo's voice was tired. "I've been with you since the beginning. I've killed for you, bled for you, lied to grand juries for you. But this path you're on, it ends badly." There was a long silence. Then Vincent spoke, his voice cold as Lake Michigan ice. "Get out." After Carlo left, Lucia found Vincent in his study, surrounded by broken glass and spilled whiskey. He looked up as she entered, his eyes wild. "What do you want?" "I heard shouting. I wanted to make sure you were all right." He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "All right? Everyone's turning on me, Lucia. Everyone. I can feel it. The walls are closing in." She moved to him, placed her hand on his shoulder the way she'd done 1,000 times before. "You're stressed. You need rest. I need loyalty." He grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "You're loyal, aren't you, Lucia? You wouldn't betray me?" She looked him in the eyes and lied with a smile. "Never. You're my husband." He held her gaze for a long moment, searching for deception. Then he released her and slumped in his chair. "Sometimes I think you're the only one I can trust." "You can trust me," she said, and meant it in a way he couldn't possibly understand. That night, Lucia went through Vincent's desk more thoroughly. She found the deed to the Cicero property, paperwork for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and a ledger that detailed payments to police officers, judges, and politicians throughout Chicago and beyond. She also found something that made her pause, a letter from her father dated 6 months before her wedding. "Vincent, I appreciate your interest in my daughter, but I must ask you to reconsider this match. Lucia is young and naive about the world you inhabit. I don't want her caught up in your business, no matter how profitable it might be. Please, as a father yourself, understand my concerns. Antonio Calabresi." Below it, in Vincent's handwriting, was a single line, "Convinced him to see reason. Wedding proceeds as planned." Lucia's hands trembled as she returned the letter to its place. She'd always thought her father had approved of the marriage, had been proud to connect their family to the powerful Morettis, but he'd tried to protect her, had tried to say no, and Vincent had convinced him to see reason. She wondered what form that convincing had taken. Money? Threats? Had her father's heart attack 6 months after the wedding really been natural causes, or had Vincent decided that a father-in-law with doubts was a liability? The next morning, Lucia went to the bank where Vincent kept his personal accounts. She'd watched him enough times to know the manager, a Mr. Whitmore, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who always looked slightly nauseated when Vincent entered the building. "Mrs. Moretti?" he said, rising from his desk as she approached. "This is unexpected. Is there something I can help you with?" "I hope so." She smiled warmly, the perfect society wife. "My husband wants to make some changes to our accounts, but he's been so busy lately. He asked me to come in and begin the paperwork." She handed him a letter, forged on Vincent's personal stationery with his signature carefully copied from a dozen examples. Mr. Whitmore read it, his eyebrows rising. "He wants to add you as a joint account holder with full access? Is that a problem?" "No, of course not. It's just unusual." He glanced at her, then at the letter. "I'll need Mr. Moretti to come in and sign the actual papers, you understand? For security purposes. Naturally. I'll have him come by next week." She stood to leave, then paused. "Mr. Whitmore, I wonder if I might ask you something in confidence." "Of course, Mrs. Moretti. If someone wanted to transfer a large sum of money, say To a foreign account? How would they go about it? Hypothetically speaking, Mr. Whitmore's discomfort was palpable. Well, hypothetically, there are wire transfer services. Swiss banks are popular for those seeking discretion, but such transactions require extensive documentation and can take several days to complete. Several days. That's good to know. She smiled again. Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore. On the street outside, Lucia pulled her fur coat tighter against the February wind. She had 3 months, maybe 4, before her plan could be executed. 3 months to learn every detail of Vincent's operation, to position herself properly, to ensure that when she struck, he would have no defense and no escape. She thought about Marco, about his laugh, his kindness, the way he'd always believed the best of people even when they didn't deserve it. Vincent had killed that, had extinguished that light as casually as stubbing out a cigarette. Lucia had been raised to believe that revenge was a sin, that forgiveness was divine, that violence only begat more violence. But God, she'd discovered, had very little to do with the world she inhabited. In Chicago, in 1931, in the shadow of Vincent Moretti's empire, there was only one law that mattered: survive or be destroyed. She chose survival. March brought a thaw to Chicago, ice melting into dirty rivers that flooded the streets and turned the city into a maze of mud and misery. Inside the Moretti mansion, the atmosphere was even darker. Vincent's paranoia had become a living thing, a beast that fed on his fears and grew stronger every day. He'd fired 3 more men, convinced they were informants. He'd moved his operations again, burning through safe houses and speakeasies like they were disposable. He'd started carrying 2 guns instead of 1, and Lucia would wake in the middle of the night to find him standing at the window, staring out at the empty street as if expecting an army to materialize from the shadows. I know they're coming for me, he'd say, his voice flat. I can feel it. Lucia would go to him, wrap her arms around him, whisper soothing lies into his ear. No one's coming. You're too smart for them. Too strong. He'd turn to her then, desperate for reassurance, for someone to believe in him. And she'd give it to him. This man who'd murdered her brother, controlled her life, and destroyed everything she'd once held sacred. She'd hold him and lie to him and carefully, meticulously, dismantle everything he'd built. Her first real move came in mid-March. Tommy O'Brien had been with Vincent since the beginning, a loyal enforcer who'd killed dozens of men without question or remorse. But Tommy had a weakness: gambling. He lost fortunes at underground poker games, borrowed from loan sharks, and lived perpetually on the edge of financial ruin. Lucia found him at one of Vincent's speakeasies, a place called the Silver Dollar on the near west side. She'd never visited any of Vincent's establishments before. Wives didn't, not unless they wanted to be seen as interfering. But she'd sent word ahead through Rosa that Mrs. Moretti had business to discuss. Tommy met her in a private room above the bar, his freckled face wary. Mrs. Moretti, this is unexpected. I need your help, Tommy. She sat in the chair across from him, her posture perfect, her voice steady. And I think I can help you in return. I don't understand. You owe Mickey Doyle $30,000. You're 3 weeks behind on payments, and Mickey's not known for his patience. She paused. I can make that debt disappear. Tommy's face went pale, then red. How do you know about... I know a lot of things, Tommy. I know about the skimming from the Henderson speakeasy. I know about the warehouse in Gary that Vincent doesn't know exists. I know that you're loyal to Vincent, but you're also drowning, and drowning men will grab at any rope thrown to them. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a lifeline. She remained seated, unruffled. In 4 weeks, Vincent is going to ask you to do something. When he does, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. If you do this, your debt to Mickey disappears, and you walk away from all of this with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from Chicago. And if I don't, then Mickey gets a visit from someone who tells him exactly where to find you. And Vincent gets an anonymous letter detailing your various betrayals. She stood now, meeting his eyes. I don't want to destroy you, Tommy. I just need your cooperation. Once. Tommy's jaw worked, anger and fear warring in his expression. Finally, he nodded. What does Vincent ask me to do in 4 weeks? I'll tell you when the time comes. For now, just wait. She moved to the door, then paused. And Tommy, if you tell Vincent about this conversation, I'll know, and you'll regret it more than you can possibly imagine. She left him there, trembling and furious. and felt nothing. Mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her second move was more delicate. Carlo Benedetti was Vincent's oldest friend, his most trusted advisor, and the only man in the organization with the authority to question Vincent's decisions. He was also exhausted, tired of the violence, tired of the paranoia, tired of watching Vincent spiral into madness. Lucia arranged to encounter him, accidentally, at morning mass at Our Lady of Pompeii Church. She'd learned that Carlo attended every Sunday, a habit from his childhood that even decades of murder hadn't broken. "Mrs. Moretti?" Carlo's surprise was genuine. "I didn't know you attended Mass here. I used to come with my father." She lit a candle at the altar, her hand steady. "Do you have a moment, Mr. Benedetti? I'd like to speak with you." They walked in the church gardens, early spring flowers just beginning to bloom, the morning sun weak but present. Lucia was careful with her words, planting seeds rather than making declarations. "Vincent isn't well," she said quietly. "I'm worried about him. We all are. He trusts you more than anyone. If something happened to him, if he were unable to lead the organization, what would happen to his operations?" Carlo glanced at her sharply. "That's a dangerous question, Mrs. Moretti. I'm not plotting anything, Mr. Benedetti. I'm just—" She let her voice break slightly, allowed tears to shine in her eyes. "I'm scared. For him. For myself. This can't continue. He's going to get himself killed, or arrested, or worse. And when he falls, everyone around him falls too." Carlo was silent for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know." She wiped at her eyes. "But if there was a way for him to step back, to retire with dignity before it's too late, wouldn't that be better than waiting for the inevitable? Vincent would never retire. You know that. Men change their minds when presented with the right circumstances." She looked at him directly. "I just want him safe, Mr. Benedetti. Whatever it takes." She left him in the garden, thinking, doubting, wondering if there was a way out of the trap they'd all built for themselves. The third move was the most critical. Lucia needed access to Vincent's money, not just the household accounts, but the real wealth hidden in offshore accounts and safe deposit boxes throughout the city. She needed his trust completely, needed him to believe that she was the only person in the world who wouldn't betray him. So she manufactured a crisis. In early April, she went to Vincent in tears, claiming that she'd overheard Rosa on the telephone, speaking to someone about Vincent's schedule, his movements, his vulnerabilities. She'd been so shocked, she said, so horrified that someone in their own household would betray them. Vincent's rage was immediate and volcanic. He dragged Rosa from her quarters, threw her against the wall of his study, and demanded the truth. The poor woman, terrified and confused, swore she'd done nothing wrong, had spoken to no one, was loyal to the Morettis. But Vincent was beyond reason. He would have killed Rosa right there if Lucia hadn't intervened, throwing herself between them, begging him to wait, to investigate further before acting. "She's been with us for years," Lucia pleaded. "Please, Vincent, don't do this on my word alone. What if I misunderstood? What if it wasn't her?" Finally, Vincent agreed to have Rosa watched, to monitor her movements and contacts. He sent her away with a warning, and then he turned to Lucia, with something like wonder in his eyes. "You saved her life," he said, "even after she betrayed us. I want to be sure before someone dies because of me." She touched his face gently. "You've taught me to be careful, to verify before acting." He pulled her close, holding her with a desperation that might have moved her once. "You're the only one, Lucia. The only person I can trust absolutely. Then trust me with everything," she whispered. "Let me help you protect what you've built. Teach me about the accounts, the holdings, the safe houses. If something happens to you, I should know how to preserve your legacy." And he did. Over the next 2 weeks, Vincent walked her through his entire empire. He showed her the ledgers that detailed every transaction, every payoff, every hidden account. He gave her combinations to safes, keys to deposit boxes, contact information for his attorneys and offshore bankers. He made her the only person besides himself who knew where all the bodies were buried, both figuratively and literally. "Why are you doing this?" Carlo asked Vincent one evening, his voice heavy with concern. "Why are you telling her everything?" "Because she's my wife," Vincent said simply. "Because if the feds come for me, or if one of our rivals gets lucky, someone needs to be able to access the money, to pay off the right people, to keep the operation running, or to disappear with everything you've built." Vincent laughed. "Lucia, she wouldn't know how to betray me if she tried." She's devoted to me completely. In the shadows of the doorway, Lucia listened and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even grim amusement at his arrogance. She'd moved beyond emotion into something colder and more efficient, pure calculation, pure purpose. By mid-April, all the pieces were in place. She'd suborned Tommy O'Brien with debt relief and the promise of escape. She'd planted doubt in Carlo Benedetti's mind about Vincent's stability and future. She'd gained access to all of Vincent's financial assets and operational knowledge. She'd transferred small amounts of money, amounts Vincent wouldn't notice, to accounts only she could access. And she'd arranged for the property in Cicero to be prepared for its final, terrible purpose. The night before she set everything in motion, Lucia sat alone in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids and the scent of earth. She thought about the girl she'd been at 17, naive, romantic, eager to please. That girl had died slowly over 4 years, murdered piece by the man she'd married. In her place was someone harder, colder, capable of things that would have horrified her younger self. But this new Lucia had a clarity the old one had never possessed. She understood that in a world of monsters, the only way to survive was to become something more monstrous than they could imagine. Tomorrow she would begin the end. Tomorrow, Vincent Moretti would learn that the greatest mistake of his life wasn't underestimating his enemies. It was underestimating his wife. The call came at midnight on April 23rd. Vincent's voice crackling through the telephone line with barely contained excitement. "Lucia, I need you to meet me in Cicero. The vineyard. It's important." But it was Lucia who'd placed the call, using one of Vincent's men to deliver the message, using Vincent's own paranoia against him. She'd planted rumors through Tommy O'Brien that a rival faction was planning to hit one of Vincent's safe houses, that they'd discovered the location of his offshore accounts, that someone close to him had finally betrayed him in a way that couldn't be ignored. "I'll be there," she said, injecting just the right amount of concern into her voice. "Is everything all right?" "It will be. I'm ending this tonight. All of it. I've figured out who's been working against me, and I'm going to finish them." His voice was manic, unhinged. "Meet me at the vineyard in an hour. Come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." "Of course." She hung up the telephone and stood in the dark hallway of the mansion for a long moment, steadying herself for what came next. The drive to Cicero took 40 minutes through empty streets, the city sleeping uneasily under a clouded sky that promised rain. Lucia drove herself, something Vincent had taught her years ago, insisting his wife should be independent, capable. He'd never imagined she'd use that capability against him. The vineyard sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by acres of carefully tended grapevines that looked like skeletal fingers in the darkness. The main house was small, barely more than a cottage, with a barn behind it and various outbuildings scattered across the property. Vincent's car was already there, parked beside the barn. Lucia pulled up next to it and cut the engine. For a moment she simply sat there, breathing, preparing. Then she reached into her handbag and withdrew the small pistol she'd taken from Vincent's desk drawer. A lady's special, he'd called it when he gave it to her the first year of their marriage, teaching her to shoot in case she ever needed to defend herself. The irony was not lost on her. She found Vincent in the barn, pacing among old wine barrels and farming equipment. He spun when she entered, his gun already drawn, then lowered it when he saw her face. "Lucia. Thank God." He holstered the weapon and pulled her into an embrace. "I'm sorry for the drama, but I needed to see you somewhere safe, somewhere none of them would think to look." "Vincent, what's happening? You sounded—" "I know who it is," he interrupted, his eyes wild. "I know who's been betraying me. It's Carlo. It's been Carlo all along." Lucia's expression was perfectly calibrated. Shock, disbelief, confusion. "Carlo? That's impossible. He's been with you since the beginning. That's what made him perfect." Vincent released her and resumed pacing. "He knew everything about my operation. He had access to everything. And he's been feeding information to the feds, to my rivals, probably planning to take over once I'm arrested or dead." "Do you have proof?" "I have enough. Tommy confirmed it tonight. Said he overheard Carlo making calls, passing information." Vincent's voice rose. "I should have seen it sooner. All his talk about me being too violent, too paranoid. He was trying to make me weak, trying to make me doubt myself." Tommy had confirmed it because Lucia had told him exactly what to say, exactly how to present the information so that Vincent's paranoid mind would fill in the gaps. Carlo Benedetti, the loyal friend, was about to become the final victim of Vincent's madness. "What are you going to do?" Lucia asked quietly. "I'm going to kill him. Tonight. I've already arranged for him to meet me here at 2 a.m. He thinks we're planning a big operation, a way to consolidate power." Vincent checked his watch. "He'll be here in 30 minutes, and when he arrives, I'll put a bullet in his head and bury him in the vineyard, where no one will ever find him." "Vincent." Lucia moved to him, placed her hand on his arm. "Are you sure about this? Once you kill Carlo, there's no going back. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong." He shook her off violently. "Why are you defending him? Unless—" His eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "Unless you're working with him." This was the moment. The precipice. Lucia felt time slow down, felt the weight of everything she'd planned, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she was about to do. "You're right," she said softly. "I am working with him." Vincent froze. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he simply stared at her, his brain trying to process words that couldn't possibly be real. Then his hand moved toward his gun. But Lucia was faster. The lady's special cleared her handbag and pointed at his chest before he could draw. "Don't. Lucia." His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago." Her hand was steady, her voice calm. "When I found out, you killed Marco." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by calculation. "Your brother. He was working with the feds, Lucia. He was going to—" "He was innocent." She cut him off. "He asked questions because he was worried about me, because he loved me, and you killed him for it. It was business. You know how this works. You can't let family loyalty cloud your judgment." "You're right," she agreed. "I can't." Vincent's expression shifted, became the charming smile he'd used to court her, to seduce her, to make her believe he loved her. "Baby, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, whatever Carlo told you, it's not true. I love you. I've always loved you. You love power. You love control. You loved having me as a trophy, a connection to my father's world." She gestured with the gun, moved toward the center of the barn, slowly. He obeyed, his mind clearly working through scenarios, looking for an opening. "If you're working with Carlo, where is he? Why isn't he here?" "He's not coming. No one's coming except us." "Then what's your plan? You shoot me, take my money and run?" Vincent laughed, the sound echoing in the empty barn. "You think you can just kill me and walk away? My men will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Your men are tired, Vincent. Tired of your paranoia, tired of your violence, tired of wondering if they'll be next on your execution list." She pulled a coil of rope from behind a barrel with her free hand, tossed it to him. "Tie your ankles together, tightly. Lucia, do it, or I put a bullet in your knee, and do it myself." He tied his ankles, his movements slow and deliberate. She circled him carefully, keeping the gun trained on his center mass, then forced him to his knees and bound his hands behind his back. Only when he was completely restrained did she lower the weapon slightly. "You'll never get away with this," Vincent said, breathing hard. "Even if you kill me, even if you take all my money, you'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." "I know." Lucia moved to the barn doors and pulled them open. Outside, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. "That's why I'm not going to kill you." Hope flared in his eyes. "Then what?" She walked back to where he knelt and backhanded him across the face with the gun, hard enough to split his lip. "I'm going to bury you." It took a moment for the words to register. Then Vincent's face went white. "No, Lucia, please. You don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly." She grabbed a shovel from the wall. "There's a plot I had prepared 3 days ago. Deep enough that no one will find you, no one even knows this property exists. You made sure of that." "Lucia, listen to me." His voice cracked with panic. "I'm sorry about Marco. I'm sorry about everything. We can fix this. We can go somewhere else, start over, be the couple we were supposed to be. We were never supposed to be a couple. You murdered my father when he tried to stop our wedding. You killed my brother when he asked too many questions. You've controlled every aspect of my life for 4 years." She opened the barn doors wider. Outside, Tommy O'Brien's truck was pulling up the drive. Vincent saw the truck and began to struggle against his bonds. Tommy, help me." But Tommy climbed out of the truck slowly, his freckled face grim. He looked at Vincent, then at Lucia, then back to Vincent. "Sorry, boss," he said, "but Mrs. Moretti made me a better offer." Together, Lucia and Tommy dragged Vincent from the barn. He fought. He screamed, he begged, he threatened, but bound as he was, there was nothing he could do. They hauled him across the muddy vineyard to where a plot had been excavated, not deep enough to be a grave, but deep enough to trap a man. The crate was Tommy's idea, a wooden box, large enough for a man to crouch in, with holes drilled in the top for air. They forced Vincent into it, his screams muffled by the rain that was now falling steadily, and sealed the lid. Then they lowered the crate into the hole and began to fill it in. "Lucia," Vincent's voice came from below the earth, terrified and disbelieving. "Lucia, please, I'm your husband, I love you." She shoveled dirt steadily, methodically, her muscles burning but her resolve absolute. "You taught me that family doesn't matter in business. You taught me that loyalty is weakness. You taught me that the only thing that matters is survival." Another shovelful of earth hit the crate with a hollow thump. "Consider this my final lesson. I'll die down here. Is that what you want? To be a murderer? I want you to suffer the way Marco suffered, the way my father suffered, the way I've suffered every day since I learned the truth." The dirt was covering the crate now, muffling his screams. "You'll have air for a few days. Water will seep in from the rain. Maybe someone will find you. Maybe you'll claw your way out. Maybe God will have mercy on you." "You won't," Lucia said, her voice carrying through the rain and the darkness, "because God doesn't come to places like this, and neither does mercy." They buried him until the earth was level again, until no one would know that beneath the vineyard, beneath the carefully tended grapevines, Vincent Moretti was screaming into the darkness of his own grave. When it was finished, Lucia stood in the rain, covered in mud, exhausted. Tommy waited by the truck, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "What now?" he asked. "Now you take the money I promised you and disappear. California, maybe, or Mexico, somewhere far from Chicago." She handed him an envelope thick with bills. "You were never here. You never met me. You know nothing about Vincent's disappearance. And you? I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and discover that my husband never came home. I'm going to report him missing. I'm going to cry at all the right times and say all the right things." She looked back at the mound of fresh earth. "And then I'm going to take everything he built and burn it to the ground." Tommy nodded slowly. "He was right about one thing, you know." "What's that?" "You're the only one he could have trusted absolutely." He climbed into his truck. "Because you're more ruthless than he ever was." She watched his taillights disappear down the gravel drive, then turned back to the vineyard one last time. Somewhere beneath her feet, Vincent Moretti was experiencing the death he'd given to so many others. Slow, terrified, alone. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no triumph. Just a cold certainty that some debts could only be paid in blood and earth. Lucia Moretti drove back to Chicago as dawn broke over the city, washing the mud from the car at a gas station on the outskirts, changing her clothes in a public restroom, becoming once again the perfect Mafia wife. She would play the part beautifully, she would mourn convincingly, and she would take everything Vincent had built, every dollar, every connection, every scrap of power, and use it to disappear into a life he could never have imagined for her. By the time anyone thought to look for him in Cicero, she would be gone, vanished like smoke, leaving behind only whispers and legends. They say that on windy nights, if you walk through the old vineyard outside Cicero, you can still hear screaming coming from beneath the ground. They say that Lucia Moretti crossed the border with millions, started a new life where no one knew her name. They say a lot of things, but the truth is simpler and more terrible. In a city that made monsters of men, one woman learned their lessons too well, and in the end, she became something they'd never anticipated. Not a victim, not a widow, not a powerless pawn. She became the thing that haunted their nightmares, the price of their arrogance, the bill that always comes due. She became the woman who buried the monster alive and walked away without looking back. In 1931, Chicago, where jazz played until dawn and blood ran in the gutters, Lucia Moretti learned that the only way to escape a cage was to bury the man who built it, and bury him she did.